Okay guys, the saga continues. So after I assembled electronic parts and verified that it's actually operational, I decided to continue with the assembling of the actually printer mechanical part or printer body. So I will try to partition this second part in such a way that, for example, we'll be able to first build components and then assemble those components. For example, build base, build X part of the business, build, for example, Z axis, and so on and so forth, or and then assemble those things together. In such a way, it will be easier to actually track our progress and easier to make sure that actually parts fits together properly and they assemble in correct order. So let's start with the base. So base of the printer is this massive plate, and it contains several pieces which has to fit together. So we have few of these double extrusions. So the shorter one goes over here. Then we have this little guy over here, and the tall ones goes this way. So let's put it all quickly together. So in order to fix those extrusions, we need to use those T-slots. So for example, we insert T-slot over here, and then we feed the screw from the bottom of this plate into it. We have to do this 1, 2, 3 holes over here, 1 hole over here. So now we have to install base and screw it first from the bottom with M5 screws. Sorry for that. Just like this. There are 2 holes over here. Or maybe we'll no. Here. This is our M5 screws. M5 by 8. Actually M5 by 10. So after we install bottom one screws, we have to take the longest one, M5 by 40, and use it to secure it to the side bracket. This contraption would be pretty rigid. It doesn't budge. It's actually quite seriously screwed in. Obviously you can actually torque all those screws with some serious torque wrench. I just used hang torque them with screwdriver, but that's decent enough. Because this is the base of the printer. It has to be as rigid as possible. Alright, so this is ready. So essentially base with z-axis and y is ready. So let's continue to the Y driver motor. We put it to the side for now. So this is all what we need to assemble Y-axis motor assembly. So we need 3 T-slot nut, we need 4 M3 screws, we need 2 M2 screws and 2 M2 nuts, limiting limiting Y switch motor with this sort of gear, and this kind of plate. It's only one plate like this, so it will be hard to miss. So first of all, let's attach motor to the plate. We're gonna use all these M3 screws in order to secure it to this plastic bracket. So it is very important for this connector to be facing inside of the unit, just because if it's gonna be poking outside like this on top, so it may interfere with the print bed. All right, now let's install limiting switch. It's okay to bend a little bit of contacts of the limiting switch. Make sure you're installing a limiting switch in such a way as me. This limiting switch arm facing up. So in order to build print bed assembly, we need the print bed itself, 3 bearings, 3 spacers, 3 M5x30 bolts and 3 nuts. So when you're assembling this thing, make sure you are using it in the right orientation. So this is the right orientation towards how it's going to be on your printer, just like that. So you would have to insert bolts on this on top side down, and then assemble the whole contraption just like that. Spacer, bearing, nut. I would like to see those nuts to be with nylon spacers, with nylon anti-unscrew protection. I don't know how you say it, just to make sure they are not unscrewing on their own, but because it will be pretty good upgrade, so maybe I'll do it later, buy some M5 nylon spacers. Just hand tighten them. Okay, next let's assembly Y-axis pulley. So for that we need this kind of contraption with bearing inside, 3 T nuts, and this, I don't know, looking bracket. So we would have to attach those here and this through this hole. Let's do it. So now let's assemble or put this Y pulley on the Y axis. Okay, this is essentially our bed travel, and this is pulley and this is driver for the Y axis. So let's continue to the Z axis, which is going to be installed over here. So in order, next step is to assemble that carriage assembly. So for that we need this plasticky bracket, metal bracket, X axis, 3 bearings, 6 plastic inserts, 3 M5 by 40 screws, a motor with the 16 sprocket over here, brass bushing for that rod, 4 M3 screws, 3 M3 screws for the bushing, 2 T-slot screws, and 3 M5 nuts. So this is essentially all to assemble Z carriage assembly. So let's do it. So now we can slide this assembly over the Z-axis, just like this. And as you notice, it actually slides very nicely. And it's because it's heavy, it will slam down in the print bed, so careful. With all this put together, now we can insert our extruder. So extruder has a bunch of wires, so be careful not to pinch anything, but extruder will go on just like that. Okay, and now very important to know about Z-axis assembly. So when I first time assembled this contraption, I noticed that when I put it back on this Z-axis, I noticed it has a wobble. And I think this is a big problem with those 3D printers, with this particular assembly, that it may develop a wobble. But the way actually to mitigate the problem, at least the one way I found right now, is to, when you're assembling those bearings, when you're tightening them together, make sure you pushing this bearing, for example, towards the axis when it's gonna be installed on this 2040 extrusion, like pushing it this way and then tightening the screw and the nut. And then on this side, when you tightening it, you push it that way. So make sure it as snug as possible towards 2040 extrusion. And about this one, so again, when you're tightening this one, you are tightening it, while you're tightening it, you're pushing it this way again, which is going to be as close as possible to the 2040 extrusion. So when I've done it, like, take a look at this, it doesn't wobble at all. It's substantially better. So I'm not sure how long this gonna last, but the main problem is to make sure the Z-axis doesn't have wobble. If it has wobble, your print gonna be pretty bad. There's another one of the important feature. When your axis lies down on the bed, it has to be parallel to the bed, the X-axis, as parallel to the bed as much as possible. If there is an angle in between this and that of some sort, bad. not supposed to happen. Make sure you tightened everything is whatever you tighten here is pretty snug. Also that all these lines are parallel as much as possible, otherwise you're not gonna have any good prints at all. So let's continue further down the road and try to assemble our idlers for the X belt. So in order to assemble Y-axis pulley, we need this bracket, bearing, and two of these. That's pretty simple. Let's quickly install them. It has to be installed like this. So now let's install X limiting switch, which is going to be installed over here, just like this. For that we would need two more T-nuts, almost sound like a peanuts, a limiting switch of a sort, installed I think this way, and we would need two M2 and nuts. Okay, let's do it. Alright, so this is all good. X pulley, X limiting switch is installed. Y pulley and Y limiting switch is installed as well. Okay, so next part would be to assemble that drive, lead screw, and whatever. Oh, and the anti-backlash coupler. So for this you need bracket, coupler, Z motor stepper driver, lead screw. This is 5, I believe, millimeter lead screw. Looks like it's relatively straight. Lucky me, I think. 4 longer M4 screws, like M4 by 10, or actually maybe M4 by 12, and 2 short M3s, which are actually running low. So I'm actually missing one M3 screw and 2 longer M3 screws. Okay, so let's put it all together. So first of all, let's mount that motor. So let's start assembling that motor. So first of all, I installed the T-slots over here, T-nuts over here, and then I'm gonna screw in the stepper with those longer M3 screws. I do have oodles of M3s of different lengths, so luckily I have a whole bunch of required 8mm M3 by 8, but like this is inappropriate, actually missing some screws. As you see, they're even different kinds, so whatever, but it will totally work. Yeah, but that's kind of sucks that you have to actually look for them. So if you don't have them, that will be a little bit of a problem, because all motors or any other power elements supposed to be really nicely fixed. So let's install that motor on a frame. Let's move this around. Okay, let's install, put this T-nuts in their spots. This little fella need like a push. A little bit of a push, doesn't want to push. Okay, that's solid. Now let's try to lower the lead screw. This lead screw has to be lubricated, but that's going to be done after. Okay, so it's very important to install secure lead screw properly. Into the anti-backlash coupler. So you have to so I'm gonna try to kind of tilt it in a way that you would be able to see it properly, and this extruder is okay. So there is a middle part. It's very important not to insert this stuff past that middle part. So you have to insert in such a way motor shaft that it only goes all the way till here, and the lead screw have to go all the way till this mark, no further down, because this is supposed to compensate the backlash. This is how it works. So let's try to do it right now, and you can see where you are looking through those little slots. Let's unscrew this guy first, like make sure even more, just like that. There is also a groove on the shaft, which you can, for this you can use your Allen key, which is supplied with the, okay, that's really hard to do one hand. I have to lower it like this. After you secured a backlash coupler to the motor shaft, now you try to secure it to the lead screw. Okay, pretty tight. Let's double check how it all rotates, if it rotates freely or not. Obviously now it's gonna, now you can see that that axis kind of moves upwards, and now this extruder not gonna wobble around all over the place. So now we have installed that axis assembly, and as you see my lead screw kind of wobbles a bit, but it's more or less straight along the way. Alright, so next thing we would have to install that limiting switch for that axis. For that we need limiting switch, this little bracket, one T-nut bolt, T-nut and bolt, and two M2s for the securing this thing to the bracket. So let's do it. And again, pretty much the same story, that the T-slot, nut and bolt are in the way of the little thingy. Okay, that's gonna be installed just right here. I'm not sure how low down, that has to be adjusted, I think. That has to be adjusted a bit later, because only the level of, we would know the level of the, and I hope you don't, probably don't see it. So we won't know the level of the bed, go away, at this particular moment. So we're gonna install it here and secure it. But then we would have to adjust it anyways. depending on what's the level of the bed. Alright, so we have all three limiting switches installed, and then we're gonna adjust it a bit later. So what left? Now we have to install extruder. Sorry, not extruder, the feed motor, which is gonna feed the filament into the printer. So this motor is located over here, but also we have all this stuff which is necessary to build the filament feed drive. Okay, so we have few metal parts over here: spring, adjustment nut, Bowden inlet, few M3 bolts, and this contraption. So there is a bearing. So as I understand, the grab screw, the grab roller, gonna grip the filament and feed it through the Bowden tube into the extruder. So let's install all this together. That has to be installed right here. Okay, so when you press this, it will release the filament. When you release it, it will press against the grab screw. Just like that. Release. Okay, so this contraption is installed. Again, some few more extra screws. Make sure all is tightened. Very nice. This one will be a little bit wobbly. Alright, extruder drive, filament drive is installed and secured, so make sure this is all nice and secure and allow filament to get released and pressed against the grab screw. So next step, I'm not sure if it has to be done right now, but this has to be connected to over here, so which will let filament through the Bowden tube. So what we have next is to actually install the bed itself. I would like to move for that a little the whole X assembly, move it as much as possible, and it takes some time. Alright, I think this is good enough. So let's continue with bed assembly. Actually, before we go into the assembling the bed, we have to install the GT2 belts. So we have two of them of the similar length available or shipped. So they are mediocre quality, I would say, but this is what we have, and maybe in the future I will upgrade them to something more suitable. But for now, let's try to install them. So one of the important steps which has to be done when you assembling this part, the print bed carriage, is to install GT2 belt, just because you would have to remove this to install it again, so that to install it properly. So that was my mistake, because I did it without actual user manual, but as you see, I have to take it apart and install it. So make sure that teeth on GT2 belt is actually goes to inside, and then they fish through hole in this 2040 extrusion all the way through to the motor, coming back through these two openings over here, and will be secured. So it has to be tight, but not super tight. If it's like super tight, it's gonna create extra pressure on motor. Then there is also have to make sure that you align properly all these parts as well, but that's gonna be part of setup of the whole thing. So unfortunately there is no easy way of actually adjusting the tension over here. You have to kind of unscrew and pull it this way. So yeah, this is the flaw of this particular printer, but yeah, there are many people did something to actually compensate this problem. Also on this side over here, you have to make sure you properly align the belt. It has to be straight right in the middle and not to rub against anything along the channel over here. So you have to align it nicely and then secure it with your Allen keys supplied like this and like that. So personally, I decided that I would install print bed assembly in the very last moment, because you have to still adjust all this contraption as well as this as well, but has nothing to do with print bed, but this contraption, the belt tension and so on and so forth. In order to play with it, you would still have to have access to those belts. So the print bed would be just on the way. So for now we're not gonna do this. Print bed assembly is very simple. It is also very important to pay attention that I reversed this screw. Those two are bolts are down just for convenience, but this one bolt is up. So theoretically those two can actually be facing the same way as well, but if you have this bolt down, it's gonna interfere with this extrusion over here. So this is my another oversight, that I actually has to reverse to go all the way to the motor and all the way this side as well. Actually, it's gonna jump out if you... Interesting. How do you stop from this to happen? I think there is a way. That's interesting. Unless you install this thing over here. Because I found that there is some extra spare thing and I was not able to figure out what is this for. Maybe something I figure out later. Anyways, so one extra thing which is left out at the moment is to install the handle. Where is the handle? So for the handle we have this contraption and this thing. And we would need M5 screws, 2, and 2 M4s. Yeah, looks like. Okay. So first of all, I have to secure, and this is too short. I don't have any longer ones. Interesting. But these guys are too big and I don't believe they can go here. Well, technically they can, but it's gonna be like... Okay. So let's give it a try. This is all screws what I have left, so it's just working with leftovers, whatever they forgot to ship it or... This is probably not the most important upgrade here, or in part, because you're not gonna carry this printer around with you. It's not portable enough, but maybe you can use it for to install something. Many people actually use it to install some contraptions over here, maybe filament feeder or something like that. So here we are. The one thing what left is actually install X belt as well. So let's do it. It's gonna go just like this. Slide it inside under those rollers like this. There are holes over here. And on this side there is a hole over here as well. And the belts have to be secure one way or another. More or less. Now you have to pretty much do the same job with this pulley over here. Make sure it's aligned properly, and you will be golden. Yes, it's a bit involving to set the 3D printer up. So now we have pretty much mechanical part of our 3D printer complete. We have that limiting switch installed, we have extruder motor installed, X, Y and Z motor installed over here. And this is Y, this is Z, this is X, this is extruder or filament drive motor. So this is all pretty much installed except the print bed, which I will install after I adjust those GT2 belts. Also, all electronic parts are not connected, so this is gonna be happening in the very last moment when all mechanical parts are more or less adjusted and set up. But the belt adjustment, final belt adjustment, I'm gonna do when I connect it to the controller, just because this will give me an understanding how much torque and tension require. If motors are improperly adjusted, they will be slipping or barely moving because they will require a lot of force. So that means I would have to adjust, for example, adjust pulleys, adjust belts, adjust everything else. Also, I would have to adjust this threaded rod to make sure it has enough friction, it has enough freedom to move. For example, if it's bent or if it's improperly aligned, that won't move properly. Also as well, have to make sure the extruder filament feed motor is working, and all this contraption is working as well. All this I'm going to be doing when I attach it to the controller unit. So I have put all mechanical parts together, so it's time to actually connect it to the controller board and try to see if everything operates as it's supposed to be. So for that we will connect all limiting switches, all motor, connect to controller, and also fans, temperature sensors and heat ends. or heaters, and then I'll try to put it all together and see if everything is actually functioning. There is also something to note. I have a whole bunch of spare parts, so I'm not understanding where are those coming from. But for example, this may have been, for example, installed over here. It would be totally fine. I guess I totally missed this part, but even so, still a lot of things can be attached using the T-nuts and things like that. So yeah, some parts are for the heated bed, sorry, for the print bed. For example, springs and those nuts over here. There is some screws for the heated bed over here, sorry, for the print bed over here as well. But still, it's plenty more parts than it's supposed to be. And I think I actually installed everything required. So I have trimmed all zip ties and extra belt of the axis, but except I left here because maybe I'll need to tweak it a bit more, so I just left it there. Not supposed to interfere. So this is essentially garbage, these leftovers. So now we have our motors. Motors wires are installed over here, so let's try to hook up motors. Alright, in this part of the video we try to connect our mechanical part and motors to the electronic controller or the controller board, just to make sure all electronic works, limiting switchings work and things like that. So I already connected all motors to the appropriate connectors on the board. Now I try to connect limiting switches. So here's the Y limiting switch. It goes into the Y stop. Please make sure the order is correct, because it will confuse the controller a lot. So this is X, it goes into X stop, and Z goes to the Z stop. Now we have also fan which cooling down the hot end. It goes into appropriate says fan connector on the board, and there is also the temperature sensor which we need to still undo. Right, should be careful with this guy because it's usually tiny wires and stuff. Good, it's all quite long. Okay, so all this extruder part, side of business. Okay, so temperature go into E temp, because B temp is bad temperature. It's good it has support of bad temperature. Now the wires for the heat cartridge, they are pre-stripped, so you can just like slightly fix them to make sure they are all nice and sharp, and to insert them into appropriate says hot end, into the hot end connector over here. So let's unscrew this guy. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. I think 5 spins are enough. Polarity doesn't matter obviously for this guy. It's a resistor pretty much, so it doesn't matter with the polarity. Is important only for the fans, but we assume that polarity is correct out of the box, so we don't have to think about that. But for some other printers it was actually quite a problem that polarity of some fans was not matching the printer polarity. Okay, so now we have everything connected together, and let's try to power this up and see what's happening. I'm gonna remove some extra bits and pieces in order to actually see the front of the controller board, just like so. The first thing, I connected the power supply, and unfortunately, because this guy doesn't have a power button of a sort, it started doing something right away. So looks like it's working. LCD is showing stuff. So it says printer is ready and showing the temperature 16.9 degrees. So I assume it's already reading the temperature from temperature sensor. It's kind of positive thing. Let's remove some bits and pieces. Alright, so what we can check, first of all, if limiting switches are working. But if something go haywire, we have to be quick enough to actually yank the power in order not to let the printer destroy some of the components. So what can we do? Let's go into position, and in the position let's go to Home X. Home X doesn't work. Let's go to Home Y. Doesn't work, surprisingly. Let's go to Home Z. Okay, Home Z works, making noises, but it works. I can see a slight wobble of the... Okay, now it's binding. Yeah. So this is all problems we have to address when we're adjusting our printer. So looks like there is a bind in this rod. Let's see if X and Y actually operates as well. That's perfect. That's all I want to see. Let's go Y. Perfect. That's working. Let's go back. Extruder. Let's check extruder. In order to check extruder, we can do extruder position, and let's say, oops, looks like extruder motor actually works. It rotates and it's positive, so that means it feeds the, you're gonna be feeding the filament. Perfect. So we only have a problem with that, motor. That's essentially mean that our rod is not properly lubricated, and or it's actually crooked and bent and therefore non-operational. Alright guys, after lubricating the whole entire Z rod with this light oil for air tools, I actually make it to work nicely back and forth and homing properly. The only problem, I think it's still kind of bendy. This rod is slightly bent, and sometimes when it goes back and forth it starts squealing. But essentially I have to address this as a separate issue, but because out of the box we actually perform our duty and we did assemble motor, the Z assembly properly. So as of now, let's quickly check also the X and Y, how they operate. So go back to position, and for example go X pause fast. Seems like it's working okay. Let's do Home X. Okay, of course this is a bad idea to have wire just sticking out here, and in case it's gonna be like jammed by the extruder, but for now we are okay, I think, as long as I see what's happening. It's not gonna be staying like this. No, so now let's check Y, or position of the print bed, because Y controls print bed. It's obviously making this wee kind of high-pitched noises, but it operates fine. Still can go past 150, I think, but not too far. Alright, so let's bring it back to home. Okay, that works pretty well. Looks like I kind of out of the box more or less adjusted tension on this Y and X GT2 belts. Seems like they are okay. I still would like to tweak it a little bit better, but as of verification phase of our assembly of Tronxy printer, actually I just noticed that fan is not spinning. So fan is quite important to spin. Maybe I connected to the wrong connector. It has to spin always, at least in my other printers it does. So let's check. Now it spins. So yes, I did connect it to the wrong connector. So anyways, so because there is also part fan which you able to control from the controller board and the extruder fan, so I just mixed them up. That's quite important. So fan has to spin all the time, and cooling, make sure it cools down the extruder even after you're not printing, because it has to cool down. Alright, so verification phase of our printer assembly is done. From this point we have to make it look nice, and I am planning to use this little object which is 8mm tall in order to actually adjust all my bed adjusters to the same height. So I'm gonna place it right underneath. And make sure it touches this 8mm adjuster. Alright, a little bit back, remove, and let's do it on all other sides. Now, when print bed is installed and roughly on the same height on all these sides, we will install the print surface. Okay, so here our Garolite print surface, and we have three. I don't know how it's supposed to be, how many it's supposed to be, but I have three clips which will clip the print surface to the print bed. I would recommend clipping them, but maybe two would be might be enough, but just like on the very edges like this. Like for example here and here, probably would be enough, but we can try to actually even clip one more over here. So here we are. This will ensure, but actually you see this is slightly moving, so that is actually not good if you are gonna get force one, because this end will be like millimeter higher than it's supposed to be. So we may just do something like that, which will be better, but still I feel like this side is kind of buckling up. Maybe just like this. Anyway, so roughly this is it. So all parts of our 3D printer are installed, except I have a whole bunch of spare parts. I don't believe I'll be so oblivious and actually completely miss a whole bunch of things, but check this out, a whole bunch of screws are still left. So at this point we would have to just tidy all this up and try some sort of our first 3D print. Okay, so my general idea for tidying it up, I'm going to put together or zip tie together all extruder wires in one batch. So for example, just like so. I'm not gonna tie them up. Alright, I did some wire management and it took some time. So I decided to bunch up all extruder cables together and wrap it into this plastic wrap or sleeve of some sort. But I had a really hard time to wrapping in the sleeve all this like motor stuff, so I just bunched up it in a few zip ties and left it like that. I will think, how would I manage wires for these guys? So the most important to make sure that there is a free space and a little bit of, you know, extra cable for those two motors because they're gonna move up and down. Everything else doesn't really matter. And also for this limiting switch, right, if you're gonna go all the way up, it's gonna pull all these cables, so that's quite important to have some slack here as much as possible. So this is what I don't like about this particular design. It's like it feels like this, some of the limiting switches have to be longer, but they all the same size, limiting switches cables. So probably gonna address it sometime in the future, but as of right now, this is actually looking okay for me. And the next step would be is to try actually print something. Also, I'm gonna move this on this side. Yep. Try to actually do something with this 3D printer and actually see any kind of result.